The first surprise wasn't the size of the storage unit or the crowd packed into the narrow lane between corrugated doors. It was the feeling that crept up Mabel and Roscoe Harlan's spines the moment the auctioneer's latch snapped and the metal door rattled waist-high. They had come with careful money, an envelope counted 3 times at the kitchen table, and a plan that was more caution than courage, yet the sight inside Unit C-17 pinned them in place. Not piles of boxes or sagging furniture, but a single wooden crate, the kind built from thick tongue-and-groove planks and banded with steel, a crate so large it filled the back wall and most of the floor, a crate that looked less shipped than installed. No labels faced the aisle, no markings offered hints, only raw wood the color of old honey and a faint, tarry smell that didn't belong to dust. They were not the kind of couple who chased mysteries. Roscoe kept lists folded into his wallet. Mabel folded receipts into clean envelopes marked by month. Their winter had been long on bills and short on grace, roof patches, copays, polite notices that never said worry but meant it, and even here, among the clink of padlocks and the auctioneer's sing-song, they stood with the quiet of people who knew the cost of guesses. Still, the crate held their eyes. Roscoe noted how it sat on skids instead of the concrete, how shims under the front edge kept it level, how the nails had been driven in lines so straight they looked printed. Someone had meant this to last. Someone had meant it not to be opened by accident. Bids began the way they always do, half-hearted and cautious, drifting like small stones tossed into deep water. A reseller with a clipboard offered the first number, a woman in a ball cap bumped it, and then the room's attention waned. One crate, after all, suggested cost to haul and risk to profit. Roscoe felt his old mechanic's instincts prick, the same sense that had told him, decades ago, which engines would turn after a single coaxing twist and which would grind a man's patience into filings. The auctioneer's voice lifted, going once, and Mabel's hand found his sleeve, a touch that said measure twice. When the number hung in the air like a dare, Roscoe raised his paddle with the same steady motion he'd used to set torque wrenches. Not bravado, just decision. 2 bids later, the gavel popped the air, and the door, the risk, and that impossible crate belonged to them. They did not rush the opening. They paid, signed the release with hands that wrote smaller than usual, and listened as the manager, a bulky man with a polite smile that never reached his eyes, ran through the rules. 48 hours to clear, leave the aisle clean, anything hazardous reported. He added, almost as an afterthought, that C-17 had been a long-term account, paid like clockwork for nearly 2 decades by an out-of-state card until payments stopped last summer. The detail settled in Mabel's mind like a pebble in a shoe. People forget for a month. They don't forget for 20 years and then remember every single one. She filed it away with the way the manager avoided looking directly into the unit, as if the dark might look back. They lifted the door to its track and stood in the cool dim. The crate's top edge was a head higher than Roscoe. Its front panel, unpainted and seamless, had been screwed down with square drive fasteners most weekend handymen never own. Along the left side, half hidden where the aisle's light didn't reach, Mabel spotted the ghost of numbers, stencil spray that humidity had softened with time. She wiped with a sleeve until the shapes sharpened into a date and a city she remembered from the evening news 20 years ago, the kind of place where things were shipped more often in secret than in pride. Her breath shortened not from fear exactly, but from the awareness that ordinary days sometimes hinge on very specific bolts. Halfway through their slow inspection, Mabel's attention drifted to the crowd thinning along the lane. 2 buyers wrestled a treadmill past the office. Another cursed a broken hand truck. Near the chain-link fence, a sedan that hadn't joined the auction idled with the patience of someone waiting for a particular scene. Its windows wore the kind of tint that turned faces into shadows. She nudged Roscoe without pointing, and he gave the smallest nod. Neither spoke. Caution had been their marriage's second language. They worked in their measured way. Roscoe traced the crate's corners, found the smallest give at the lower right, and marked 2 fasteners he thought could be backed out without splitting the wood. He did not yet reach for his driver. Mabel walked the rest of the unit's narrow perimeter, noting the absence of everything else. No leftover boxes, no stray broom, not even a discarded strap. Whoever packed this had used the space like a vault, not a closet. She pictured a different day, a different man, supervising a forklift, checking a list, stepping back to see if the crate cleared the door by an inch. It must have. There it was, wedged like a kept promise. Midday light sharpened the dust in the air, and with it came the small, practical doubt that saves people from mistakes, whether to open here, under fluorescence and eyes, or to find privacy and time. The rules said contents became theirs, but rules, Mabel knew, rarely mattered to the wrong sort of interest. They stepped back to the threshold and weighed their next move. For now, all the stake they could comprehend fit into two questions. What could be inside that required a box that size, and why had someone paid to keep it sleeping for so long? For anyone who keeps faith with careful choices and slow courage, the Harlan's kind of story travels best by word of mouth. A quiet show of support, a simple like, a subscribe, even a short comment about what you do first, helps these small, true-to-life journeys find the people who'll lean in and listen. They decided on patience. Roscoe photographed every side, every fastener, every faint stencil. Mabel jotted the unit number, time, and the manager's note about the account, then folded the page into her sweater pocket as if paper itself could keep facts from smudging. On the back edge of the crate, where darkness pooled, Roscoe found 3 short hash marks carved into the wood, not by machine but by hand, 2 close together, 1 offset, the kind of code men invent for themselves when official marks are not to be trusted. He pressed his ear to the plank and caught the faintest suggestion of a shift, not from the building or the lane, but from inside. A soft, slow slide like something heavy settling after 20 winters of stillness. They left without tools, not because they lacked them, but because walking away for one night felt wiser than feeding every curious nerve at once. Mabel signed for a second day on the unit, returned the borrowed dolly, and offered the manager a thank you that sounded exactly like those words and nothing else. Outside, the idling sedan had rolled 20 yards closer to the exit and turned its nose toward the street. As Roscoe helped Mabel into their car, he saw his own reflection in the sedan's glass. A thin, older man in a thrift store coat, and overlaid on it, just for an instant, a camera's low red blink. When he blinked back, the light was gone, or had never been there. They drove the long way home, letting side streets and familiar porches wash the storage smell from their clothes. On their kitchen table, they spread photographs, printed them on plain paper, and circled what mattered. The stenciled date from another decade, the manager's remark about the card that never missed a month, the hand-carved marks no one had reason to carve. Roscoe set a short screwdriver beside the notes the way a man sets a reminder he intends to honor at first light. Mabel set the receipts beneath a ceramic bowl and felt, for the first time in months, something that wasn't dread rising in her chest. Not joy. Not yet. Just the clean, humming edge between knowing and not, where decisions make people feel most like themselves. Night pressed in early, and with it came the small sounds of their block. Tires over wet leaves, the neighbor's screen door, a delivery van 2 doors down. Somewhere after 9, a vehicle slowed outside and paused just long enough to write a new line in the ledger of their attention, then rolled on. Mabel stood at the window without moving the curtain. Roscoe sat with his notes and stared not at the grainy photos but at the blank margins between them, where unanswered questions collect like fog. They slept a little, one ear open, both counting down to morning and the first, careful turn of a square drive bit. At dawn they would raise the door again and choose whether to back out 2 screws or 4, whether to pry a single panel or none at all, whether to trust the rules printed on the receipt or the older, quieter ones that had kept them safe through lean years and late calls. For now, the crate sat exactly where they'd left it, silent behind steel, waiting like a closed book whose title meant nothing and everything at the same time. And as the unit cooled in the night, something inside shifted once more, slow, deliberate, not quite echoing, just enough to make a man wonder whether he was hearing would remember or contents answer. The morning broke thin and cold, the kind of light that makes old paint look brittle and the air smell faintly metallic. Roscoe and Mabel arrived early, hoping to avoid the regulars who turned every unlocked door into theater. The manager wasn't there yet, only his assistant, who nodded sleepily and waved them through the gate. The storage lane was quiet except for the rattle of their dolly and the gulls circling the nearby scrapyard. When Roscoe lifted the roll door, the same stillness met them. Nothing moved, nothing seemed touched. Yet both felt that peculiar tension, as though something behind the crate had heard them coming. They'd agreed the night before, no sudden prying, no rash curiosity. Roscoe brought only the tools needed to look, not to destroy: a flashlight, a small crowbar, a box of bits. Mabel carried her notebook, gloves, and a sense of practical superstition. The air inside still smelled faintly of tar and old cedar, sharper than yesterday, and the crate's surface had beaded overnight with condensation that traced the grain like veins on skin. She brushed it away, studying again the faint stencil that marked a date, June 1998, and the coded hash marks cut into one plank. Roscoe started at the top corner, backing out a single screw, then another. The sound of the threads releasing echoed oddly in the narrow space, like air being drawn from a chest. When the fourth screw loosened, a sliver of darkness appeared between plank and frame. It wasn't empty black, it was the dense, lightless kind that feels occupied. Roscoe worked a little more, enough to pull the side panel outward an inch. The smell that drifted through was older than dust, a mingling of oil, paper, and faint mildew, like archives gone to sleep. Inside, his flashlight caught dull shapes wrapped in plastic sheeting and the outline of smaller containers stacked with soldierly precision. Each one had a label: personal effects, classified audio, film canisters, property of, and then a name scored out by thick black lines. Mabel leaned closer. "Not military surplus," she whispered. "More like someone's evidence locker." They peeled back the panel just enough to reach the nearest box. Inside lay reel-to-reel tapes, each tagged by hand in fading marker, dates from the late 90s, locations written like coordinates. Beneath them, a sealed envelope marked "Do Not Duplicate," and, under that, a small wooden case shaped like a camera housing but heavier. Roscoe set it on the floor. It opened with a squeal that spoke of long neglect. Inside were lenses wrapped in flannel and several rolls of undeveloped film labeled with a government seal. The kind he'd only ever seen in documentaries about classified archives. The breath went out of both of them in the same slow exhale. "We can't just," Mabel began, but the sentence died. She knew he wasn't listening to words now, he was listening to that low instinct that had followed him through service and work and old age. The sound of a situation turning. Roscoe took photographs of everything before touching another piece. Mabel catalogued each label and timestamp, the careful way someone trying to remain invisible still left order behind. When she leaned over the crate again, her flashlight picked up a second layer beneath the boxes: military-style cases, narrower, olive drab, fitted with recessed latches. She traced one with her gloved hand, reading the stenciled code across its lid. The numbers meant nothing to her, but to Roscoe they hummed with familiarity. Old stock codes, the kind once printed on equipment shipped overseas. Some were followed by letters that no one outside a supply unit would recognize. They stood there for a long moment, the silence so tight it seemed to press against their ears. Roscoe finally said, "Someone paid to keep this out of sight." Mabel looked at the scratched-out names. And someone else wanted to be sure it stayed that way. By noon the lane had filled again. Buyers hauling mattresses, a man shouting for help with a safe. The Harlans replaced the panel carefully and drove home with their notes. They had found something that wasn't supposed to be found, and even the air around them seemed to know it. Roscoe kept checking the rearview mirror. Every time a dark vehicle passed, his hands tightened on the wheel. At home, they spread the photos across their kitchen table, the same spot where bills once ruled their mornings. The images looked harmless: boxes, film, handwriting, but together they built a story too deliberate for coincidence. Mabel circled the crossed-out names. "These aren't random labels," she said. "They're redactions." Roscoe nodded. "Which means whatever was here, it was once official." He picked up the sealed envelope and turned it under the lamp. Inside, the faintest outline of papers, thick as passport stock. He didn't open it yet. The decision felt bigger than privacy. It felt like crossing a border. That evening, a light rain set in. While they ate soup, Mabel noticed a car idling at the corner under the street lamp, the same make and color as the sedan from the storage lot. Its headlights were off, but a pale glow lit the inside, as though someone were reading. "Roscoe," she said softly, "do you think?" He didn't let her finish. "Lock the back door," he said, setting his spoon aside. For the next hour they sat with the television on mute, pretending normalcy while listening for the change in engine note that would mean departure. It came eventually, a slow roll, then quiet. Mabel's hands trembled slightly as she washed the bowls. "If we talk to the police," she said, "they'll take everything, even if it's nothing." Roscoe nodded. "And if we don't, whoever wants this back will come anyway." In the middle of that thought came the simplest, most human instinct of all, the need for witness, for a measure of control in an unraveling day. Mabel reached for her phone, not to post or boast, but to record a brief log, a kind of diary: date, time, contents noted, observed vehicle. "If anyone ever finds this," she murmured, "they'll know we tried to do right." And for those who follow stories like theirs, where ordinary people stumble into extraordinary secrets, that same quiet instinct applies. Taking a moment to like, subscribe, or comment keeps these small truths from disappearing, like leaving a porch light on for those still out in the dark. When the rain eased, Roscoe stepped onto the porch. Across the street, the pavement shone silver under the streetlight, empty except for one set of tire marks that ended abruptly by the curb, as though the car had simply stopped existing. He closed the door and checked the locks again. In the reflection of the window, Mabel stood behind him holding the envelope, her expression unreadable. "What if this was never meant to be found by anyone at all?" she asked. He turned toward her, but before he could answer, the envelope split at one corner, and something small and metallic slid onto the floor. A key tagged with a number that matched the crate stencil, and beneath it, a folded slip of paper no larger than a receipt. It read, "If you're reading this, the clock has already started." Outside, thunder rolled once across the bay, and somewhere in the distance, an engine started. The next morning felt different before either of them spoke. The air itself seemed tuned half a note lower, as if the day had been waiting on them. Mabel found the key still lying where she'd left it, its small brass surface catching the early light like a coin pulled from a wishing well. Roscoe stared at it for a long while before saying, "Whatever door it opens, we shouldn't." But even as he said it, she knew he was already thinking of the lock it might fit. They drove back to the storage facility under a sky that promised rain again. The manager was in his office this time, shuffling through papers. He looked up when they entered, his expression polite but watchful. "Back for more treasure hunting?" he asked. Roscoe smiled thinly. "Just finishing the job. Want to make sure we didn't miss anything." The man nodded and turned back to his paperwork, but his hand paused on a clipboard as if remembering something. "Funny thing," he said. "Guy came by last week asking about that unit. Said he used to own it. Didn't leave a name. Just asked if anyone had claimed it yet." He chuckled in the shallow way people do when they want a story to sound harmless. Told him it had gone up for auction, fair and square. Mabel felt her throat tighten. "Did he leave any contact info?" "Nope," the manager said. But he looked, how do I put it, too calm. Like he already knew what you'd find. They thanked him and walked down the lane, the sound of their steps muffled by the drizzle. When Roscoe raised the door again, the air inside hit them with that same mix of oil and old paper, but now it carried something else, a faint metallic tang like gunmetal. He flicked on the flashlight. Nothing looked disturbed, yet the dust near the crate's base bore a new scuff mark, a single line as if a boot had twisted there. Mabel took out the brass key and knelt beside the crate. On the left panel, where the stenciled numbers faded into rough wood, she noticed a circular cut barely larger than a coin, plugged with a removable cap of wood putty. She scraped gently until the cap came free, revealing a small recessed keyhole, square-edged, mechanical, too neat for chance. Roscoe crouched beside her, exhaling through his teeth. "So that's what it's for," he said. She hesitated only a moment before sliding the key in. It turned with a click that sounded more like release than permission. A seam along the back of the crate shifted, and a panel eased forward by half an inch. Together they pulled it wide enough to see inside. The first layer was just as before, boxes marked personal effects and film archives. But behind them now, half hidden by the structure, stood a single heavy chest wrapped in a canvas tarp and secured with nylon straps. A tag wired to one handle bore the same crossed-out name they'd seen on the other labels. Beneath it, faint but legible, were the words "Property of Federal Evidence Chain, 2004. Roscoe stepped back. "This isn't old surplus, Mabel," he said quietly. "This is somebody's case file." She reached out, brushing away a layer of dust until the tag's last line appeared: "Do not destroy without court order." For a moment the two simply stared, understanding blooming not as discovery but as danger. If the crate had been sealed and stored for 2 decades under someone's continued payment, then whoever had kept it hidden hadn't just forgotten, it had been protected. They worked in silence, removing one box at a time until the chest stood clear. It was smaller than they expected, waist-high and solid, with a lock so industrial it seemed absurd on wood. Roscoe ran his fingers along its edge and felt a faint warmth, as though the metal had absorbed something more recent than dust. He looked toward the open door of the unit. The drizzle had turned to steady rain, silvering the asphalt, and at the far end of the lane, the same dark sedan idled again, headlights off. Mabel saw it too. "Roscoe," she said softly, "they found us." He moved to pull the door halfway down. The sedan didn't move, but its windshield wipers brushed once, deliberate, like a signal. "Get the boxes," he said. "We're not leaving it all here." They loaded the film canisters and the smallest cases into their trunk, covered them with a tarp, and left the rest untouched. Roscoe signed out at the office without looking up. The manager didn't ask questions this time. Back home, they locked the doors, drew the curtains, and began sorting through what they had taken. Each reel of film bore handwritten labels, dates, locations, and sequences labeled Evidence Copy 1 through Copy 6. The handwriting was careful but rushed, as if done by someone aware that time was short. Inside one box they found cassette tapes, each in clear plastic sleeves marked confidential testimony. Mabel pressed one to her ear, half expecting to feel a pulse. When Roscoe threaded one of the reels into an old projector he'd salvaged years ago, the film began to roll, grainy black and white footage of what looked like a dim warehouse interior. Men moved crates identical to the one they'd just opened. On the wall behind them, a calendar read July 1998. In one corner, a timestamp blinked in military format. And then in the next frame, a man stepped into view wearing a jacket marked with a federal insignia and turned toward the camera. His face was blurred, but his voice, faint but distinct, said, "All transfers approved. Proceed under Section 12, no disclosure." The film ended there, with the hum of the projector filling the silence. Mabel stared at the blank screen. "Section 12 of what?" she whispered. Roscoe didn't answer. He rewound the reel, slower this time, and paused on the last frame. Behind the official, faintly visible on the crate's corner, was a mark he recognized instantly, the same set of 3 short hash lines carved into their own box. "Same man," he murmured. "Same shipment." A knock sounded at the door. 3 short taps. Mabel froze, eyes wide. Roscoe muted the projector, the film still spinning. They waited. The knock came again, slower this time, but measured, deliberate. He motioned for her to stay put, then moved to the window. Outside, through the slit of the curtain, he saw a man standing in the rain wearing a hooded coat, hands empty, posture calm. A government car, or something pretending to be one, idled at the curb. When he opened the door a few inches, the man spoke first. "Mr. Harlan," he said, his voice even. "We believe you have something that belongs to a federal archive." Roscoe's throat tightened. "And who exactly is we?" The man smiled faintly. "Let's just say the people who paid your unit's rent for 20 years. We'd appreciate its return. Now." Before Roscoe could answer, Mabel stepped into the doorway beside him, her expression hard. "We don't even know what it is," she said. The man's smile didn't change. "Then perhaps it's best you stay that way." He slipped a card through the gap, unmarked, only a phone number printed in embossed black, and turned back to the car. As he reached it, another man inside lowered the window just enough to show the lens of a camera. A single flash burst white in the rain, then the car rolled off without haste. Roscoe closed the door and locked it. Mabel turned the card over in her hand. "No name," she said. "Just numbers." He nodded slowly. And I think that's a warning, not an invitation. That night, neither of them slept. The reels sat on the kitchen counter like open secrets, and the rain outside never stopped. Somewhere near midnight, the old projector light flickered once, though no one had touched it, and the faint smell of heated film filled the air again, like the past, still trying to speak. If you've ever wondered how far ordinary people might go to protect something they don't understand, you already know how stories like this begin to tighten their grip. Leave a like, subscribe, or share what you think they should do next. It's often the quiet voices that keep stories like theirs alive. By dawn, Mabel had made her decision. "We can't keep this," she said, "but we can decide who gets it." Roscoe looked at the reels and the black card beside them, the ink still shining faintly from rain. "Then we'd better move before someone else decides for us." Outside, the street was empty except for a single fresh footprint on the wet sidewalk, larger than either of theirs, pointed toward the house, and ending abruptly where the grass began. By the following afternoon, the Harlans' small, orderly world had been rearranged into something closer to strategy than habit. Their breakfast dishes dried untouched in the rack, and the quiet tick of the kitchen clock sounded like a countdown. Mabel sat at the table with her notebook open, every line of handwriting suddenly heavy with implication. Roscoe had spent the morning in his shed, not fixing engines but building small boxes lined with foil and wood, makeshift shields for the reels and tapes they still kept. He said it was just in case, but Mabel knew it was the same instinct that had made him check every lock twice the night before. The phone number on the black card lay face down between them. They hadn't called it, though both had thought about it. Instead, they decided to go one step ahead. If whoever had paid the storage fees wanted something back quietly, then there must be a reason they didn't simply reclaim it through the police or courts. That meant the contents were valuable, but not necessarily legal. Mabel suggested they find someone who could tell them what they were looking at without sending them straight into danger. Roscoe remembered an old acquaintance, a man named Wendell Cates, who'd once worked as a document archivist for the state before retiring in mild disgrace. "He knows redactions," Roscoe said. "Knows what people try to erase." They called him from a payphone outside the grocery store, Mabel keeping watch while Roscoe spoke. Wendell's voice came through tinny and cautious. He agreed to meet that evening at a diner off the highway, the kind of place where the coffee never stopped pouring and no one looked twice at a tired couple carrying a box. When they arrived, Wendell was already seated in a back booth, wearing a coat that had seen better winters and an expression that suggested he'd been waiting for this call all his life. Roscoe placed one of the reels and the sealed envelope on the table between them. Wendell didn't touch them right away. "Where'd you find these?" he asked quietly. "Storage auction," Mabel said. Unit had been paid on for 20 years, then suddenly stopped. Wendell let out a long breath. "You don't know how many times I've seen that pattern. Someone keeping ghosts on retainer." He examined the envelope under the light, running his fingers along the edge. "This paper's security stock," he murmured. "Federal, early 2000s. If it's sealed like this, it was meant for restricted circulation, internal transfers, sealed testimony, things that aren't supposed to have copies." He leaned closer. "And you're telling me this was left in a public unit?" Roscoe nodded. "Not exactly left. Protected. Someone kept paying." Wendell gave a small, humorless laugh. "Then someone wanted it forgotten but not lost. That's different." He finally opened the envelope with a letter opener he carried in his coat pocket, hands trembling just enough to make the motion feel ceremonial. Inside were several photographs and 2 typed pages. The first image showed a warehouse interior, the same crates from the film reels, stacked under fluorescent lights. The second showed a small private plane beside an unmarked hangar. The documents listed shipment numbers, dates, and signatures, but one line at the bottom made Mabel's stomach drop. "Transfer of evidence from closed case #87, moved under sealed directive." No agency name followed. Just a signature that had been blacked out so thoroughly the paper had warped. Wendell pushed the photos back toward them. "You didn't get this from me," he said, eyes darting to the window. Whatever this was, it crossed jurisdictions. And those who deal in sealed directives, well, they don't write follow-up reports. They erase. Roscoe tried to press him for more, but Wendell shook his head. Take this advice: if anyone contacts you again, don't run. Don't hide. Deliver it to a news outlet anonymously and disappear. Because if they're already watching, the worst thing you can do is make them chase. They paid their bill and left without looking back. As they pulled onto the highway, Mabel noticed a pair of headlights merge behind them and hold steady through 3 turns. When they exited onto a side road toward home, the lights followed. Roscoe turned onto a dirt lane, then abruptly switched off the engine and waited. The car behind them slowed, paused, and reversed away without hurry. Whoever that is, he said, gripping the wheel, they're trained not to rush. Back at the house, they packed quickly. Not to flee yet, but to prepare. Roscoe stowed the reels in his toolbox under layers of sockets and wrenches. Mabel sealed the envelope and the photographs inside a plastic bag, then slid it into the freezer behind a row of old casseroles. If someone searches, she said, they'll look for hiding spots, not leftovers. That night, a storm rolled in from the bay, hammering rain against the roof like fingers tapping an impatient rhythm. Around midnight, headlights swept across their living room again, too slow to be coincidence. Roscoe peered through the slit in the curtain. The same sedan idled at the corner, engine barely audible over the rain. They're waiting for us to make a mistake, he said. Mabel's voice was low but steady. Then let's not give them one. She began writing in her notebook again, documenting every detail, times, dates, phrases Wendell had used. When she looked up, Roscoe was at the table loading film from one of the reels into an old camera projector. If we're being followed, he said, we might as well know what's worth following. The images flickered to life on the far wall, grainy figures moving crates, the same as before, but this time the sequence ran longer. A man approached the camera carrying a folder, placed it on a table, and opened it to reveal a stack of passports, each with different names but the same photograph. The final frame froze on that face, middle-aged, narrow-eyed, with a scar along one cheek. Mabel gasped. Roscoe, that's the man who came to our door. He stepped closer, heart pounding. The timestamp in the corner read August 12, 2004. The man in the frame had not aged a day. They switched off the projector, the room falling into darkness except for the faint glow from the rain outside. Mabel whispered, how can he look the same? That was 20 years ago. Roscoe didn't answer. He was staring at the window where, just for a moment, he thought he saw the same scarred face reflected in the glass before it vanished into the dark. If you're drawn to stories where truth hides behind small decisions and courage grows from quiet lives, take a moment to like this video, subscribe for the next part, and comment what you think the Harlans should do next. Your thoughts help stories like this one reach those who still believe in uncovering the truth. By dawn, the storm had passed, but the world outside their windows felt rearranged. The footprints in the mud near the porch were not their own. In the garden, one of Roscoe's old toolboxes lay open, its contents scattered but untouched, as if someone had searched and stopped halfway. Mabel picked up a single item left inside, the brass key, polished clean of fingerprints, resting exactly where it had begun. Roscoe, she whispered, voice trembling, they've been inside. He looked at the key, at the neat way it had been placed. No, he said quietly. They've been reminding us they can be. Somewhere down the street, an engine started, steady and unhurried, driving toward a horizon they could no longer pretend wasn't watching them back. Morning light stretched across the kitchen like a verdict. The Harlans hadn't slept. They'd only moved from chair to chair, waiting for the house to breathe again. The brass key still lay on the table between them, gleaming in the pale sun. Mabel stared at it as if it might decide their next move for them. If we stay, she said softly, we wait to be found. If we run, we look guilty. Roscoe rubbed his palms together, the motion restless, automatic. Maybe the trick is neither, he said. Maybe we disappear without moving. They spent the morning building a plan the way people like them always had, practical, deliberate, built on what they could control. Roscoe cataloged every reel, every photograph, every note, sealing them in separate packages labeled only with dates. Mabel typed brief descriptions onto an old typewriter she'd kept from her teaching years, evidence film. unknown origin, discovered lawfully. They left out names, left out fear, left out themselves. Together they boxed everything and mailed it to 3 different newsrooms in 3 different cities, with no return address and only one message attached. If you want the truth, follow the chain of custody. They mailed the boxes at different times, stopping at post offices in neighboring towns, never staying long. Each errand felt like stepping through fog toward clarity. By the last envelope, they'd stopped trembling. When they returned home, the sedan was gone from its corner, the street quiet. But quiet no longer meant safe, it only meant unseen. That evening, as the sun sank behind the bay, Roscoe turned on the old projector one last time. "One more look," he said. The film rolled through the familiar warehouse, the moving men, the crates, and then something they hadn't noticed before. A brief flicker in the corner of the frame, a clipboard falling, a page torn free. When Mabel froze the reel and magnified the section, the camera captured a clear detail. A handwritten address scrawled on the clipboard's margin. Not a warehouse, an office. Department of Civil Oversight, Ridge County. Roscoe frowned. That building closed years ago. Then that's where it started, Mabel said. They drove there at dusk, the roads empty, the sky washed in orange and violet. The old government office sat at the edge of town, its sign half fallen, its parking lot cracked with weeds. They parked a block away and walked the rest on foot. The door was unlocked. Inside, the air smelled of damp paper and old paint. Every sound they made seemed to echo back through time. In the main hallway, file cabinets lined the walls like sentries. Many were empty, others sealed with rusted padlocks. At the far end, they found a single door marked Records, 87. Mabel's hand hesitated on the handle. "That's the number from the file," she whispered. Roscoe nodded and pushed it open. The room beyond was small, windowless, filled with the cold metallic scent of forgotten work. A desk stood in the center, still holding a rotary phone and a cracked lamp. On the floor beside it lay a wooden crate, half the size of the one from their unit, but unmistakably of the same make. The lid was already pried open. Inside were a few remaining papers and an empty evidence bag. On the wall above, in faded black marker, someone had written 3 words, "Do not return." Before Mabel could speak, the sound of a car door closing echoed from outside. Roscoe crossed to the window slit and looked down the hall. Headlights cut through the dust, sweeping across the far wall. "They followed," he whispered. They backed into the room's shadows as 2 figures entered the building, silhouettes against the fading light, slow, unhurried, confident. One of them carried a flashlight, the other, a small case. Roscoe recognized the movement of professionals, the kind who didn't need to hurry because the outcome was already written. He motioned for Mabel to stay quiet. The footsteps drew closer, pausing at the open door. The beam of light swept the room once, glinting off the crate. One of the men spoke softly. "They were here." His partner answered, "And they found it." The pause. "Doesn't matter. It's already gone." The beam lingered on the desk for a moment, then turned away. The footsteps retreated, steady and measured. Outside, the car engine started again and rolled off into the night. When silence returned, Mabel exhaled for the first time in minutes. "They knew," she said. "They knew we'd mail it." Roscoe nodded. Maybe that's what they wanted, to see who would. They left the building as the moon rose over the bay, pale and distant. The world felt changed, not because it had grown stranger, but because they had seen its machinery exposed. When they reached home, the street was still empty. On their porch lay a plain envelope, sealed but unaddressed. Mabel opened it carefully. Inside was a single sheet of paper and a metal badge too clean to be old. The note read, "Thank you for restoring the chain of evidence. Case 87A is closed." She stared at the words until they blurred. "Do you believe this?" Roscoe folded the note and set it on the counter. "Doesn't matter. We're not part of it anymore." They burned the last of their copies that night. Film, photos, even the notebook of details. The fire snapped and hissed in the old iron stove, sparks lifting like the ghosts of everything they'd carried. When it was done, only ash and silence remained. Weeks passed. Life returned to a slower rhythm, the kind that didn't need to be earned. They went back to morning walks, to crossword puzzles, to conversations that started and ended without fear. Some nights, though, Roscoe still caught himself watching the corner where the sedan once sat, half expecting to see headlights return. None ever did. Months later, a small package arrived with no return address. Inside was a film canister, unmarked except for a strip of tape that read "Final Transfer." Roscoe looked at Mabel. "Do we watch it?" he asked. She shook her head. "Not this time." They carried it down to the dock behind their house, the one that faced the water, and set it gently on the lake's surface. The canister floated a moment, then tilted, filling with water until it sank into the dark. "If it mattered," she said quietly, "someone else will find it." That evening, as they sat together on the porch, the sky turned soft with twilight. The world felt lighter, as if some unseen balance had finally been restored. Mabel leaned her head on Roscoe's shoulder. "You think they'll ever tell the truth?" she asked. Roscoe watched the last ripples fade from the lake. "They will," he said, "but not the way we expect. Sometimes the truth doesn't need a witness, it just needs to survive." The wind carried the scent of rain, distant thunder rolling somewhere far beyond the horizon. Inside the house, the clock ticked on, marking the slow return of ordinary life. They didn't speak again for a long time. If you followed this far, through fear, discovery, and the quiet courage of two ordinary people, remember that every hidden story begins with someone who dares to open a door. Like, subscribe, or leave your thoughts below. That small act keeps stories like theirs alive, long after the lights go out. And as night settled over the lake, a single ripple broke the surface, as if something beneath had just let go.